I'm Roland van der Ruit. I'm part of our solution architect team, and I've always focused on our process mining solutions and also our more or less adjacent solutions around task mining or automation. Now, in today's session, I want to do two different things. So we kick it off with a few slides just to introduce the concept of process mining and specifically also our view on that. And then I will take you to a demo of our solution, ARIS process mining. And again, as Malene indicated, if at any point you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end, we hope to be able to handle all of them. And if not, we will get back to those at a later stage. All right, so let's kick it off with some introductory slides. And for that, I will share my screen. And that will bring us to my slide deck. All right, so as I said, let me hide this one. The agenda. So again, we kick off with some slides on what is process mining and our view on process mining. Then I want to go into the demonstration piece, some live demo of our solution. And if time allows, also quick peek at our roadmap. So let's start with what is process mining. And I would like to illustrate that through this example here. We're looking at a beautiful beach. And I think most of us have gone to a beach, or you could also take a snowy mountaintop as another example, but let's take the beach here. You know that if you walk over a beach and at any point you turn around, you see your footprints that you have left behind in the sand. You can see if you look further back, the entire path you took. You see where you went left, where you went right, where you jumped over maybe a hole somewhere in the beach in the sand. And typically, it's not, you don't only see your own footprints and the own path you took, but also of all the other people that are currently on the beach or went ahead of you. And again, the same is very much true for snow. Now you can take that example, that illustration also to the world of processes, right? Processes are being executed. Now in the year of 2024, most processes are supported by a system or a set of systems. And these processes that are being executed leave traces within those systems. If you can imagine, things are being created like an order or an incident or an application. Things are being requested, approved, changed, cancelled, deleted, blocked, released. All of these interactions leave traces within those application systems. Now, what is then process mining? Process mining is getting these traces, or as we also call them in the process mining world, events, out of these systems. So by extracting, for example, it's then about correlating those traces, those events that belong to a singular execution of the given process that you're analyzing. And this singular execution of a process is also known as a case or a process instance in the process mining world. So then we have these little buckets of events belonging to a case. Then the next step what process mining does, it sorts them in a typically according to like when they happened. So you get like a sequential picture on these steps that have happened, these events, these traces, which in the end then leaves you with a discovered process. So now you really went from process being executed, traces are being stored in those systems. Process mining is getting those traces out, correlating those, sorting those, and that then leaves you into these discovered processes based on the data coming out of these systems of record. And then, of course, when you have that, the possibilities are endless, but typically on top of that is then an entire process analytical layer that, for example, looks at lead times, bottlenecks, wait times, or if you take a more maybe lean kind of perspective, waste in the process, perfect order, first time right, all of these analytical aspects that says something about the performance of the process. So long story short, processes are executed, they leave data traces in systems. Process mining is about getting those traces out to discover the actual process behavior, and then on top of that you can build all types of interesting analytics and insights. Now, why is that important? Because that capability of process mining allows you to do all kind of different use cases. And this next slide just shows you a selection of use cases. There are even far more use cases that you could deploy process mining in. And I just want to highlight two of them for now. Now, a very core use case of process mining, you can give it different names, but let's take here the name operational compliance, where again, process mining gives you a picture on the actual process behavior, how people are actually executing the process. If you then combine that insight with some of the references that you might already have modeled in, for example, ARIS, that should reflect on how processes should be executed, you can start comparing these and answering questions like, are we following the process? Are we on process? Are we following the reference? And if not, then what are these reasons that we're not following the process? And in the process mining world, this is also called conformancy. So that's a very core use case in process mining. Another one, then I'm looking at the bottom, obviously, is around continuous process improvement. You use process mining to set some important metrics, and again, you can call them KPIs, or you can call them process performance indicators, PPIs. Things again like lead times, or take a more lean perspective around waste, percentage of first time right, perfect order. And you can use process mining to monitor and measure these metrics. And of course, more importantly, you can also analyze if things go wrong. Because we have the full process, you can look at an outcome and then also look back, okay, but what led to that outcome? And from that, start detecting or identifying the improvements, and then start driving those improvements and continuously monitor, okay, are these improvements having the desired effect? Just two use cases where you can use process mining for. Now, I want to slowly pivot a little bit then, okay, but what is then your view on process mining? And now I'm really talking from the view from ARIS, from the ARIS perspective. Looking at any of these use cases, process mining is a very important component to it. But if you really think about any of these use cases from start to finish, you will quickly realize that process mining in and of itself is also not enough to really complete any of these use cases. Again, if you take continuous process improvement, mining very important, detecting what goes wrong, detecting the root causes, finding some of the potential improvements you can do. But then you need to start thinking, okay, what are some of these improvements? And one of those could be changing the process, getting to a new to-be state of the process. Now, then you need some more capabilities. Right? So you could, for example, start with simulating. Okay, so we realize we need to go to a new to-be state that solves whatever problem we detected. Let's experiment with some alternatives. What ifs? So what if you change this? What if you change that? So simulating is an important aspect. Then, of course, then designing the new to-be state. Right? Getting to a new process that reflects the to-be state. Making sure that that change is governed in a proper way. And when all is signed off, of course, you want to start rolling out that new design, that new to-be state across the organization. Making sure that people are enabled on this new process. And that at the very end, when it starts, when it has been implemented, also get the confirmation that people who are engaging with the process really understand the new way of working, and of course continue with process mining to make sure that this new to be state will lead to the desired outcomes. So long story short, process mining is very important, but it's also just one aspect really on any of these use cases that you see here in the slide. And this is also really what we want to emphasize with ARIS. And we really position ARIS as a platform that can support your entire process management practice, where again, we see process mining as a very important part of, but simply also a part of a wider puzzle, which also includes simulation, design, governance, also things like automation. And of course, if you look at it from a risk perspective, and monitor maybe some of the regulatory compliance around processes, also the risk and compliance aspect. So ARIS as a central component to support this entire process management practice, of which process mining obviously is a very important part of. So that's very much our view on process mining, and not treated as an isolated capability, but as a capability that works together and is part of a wider solution. Now, of course, now coming a little bit to the how of it. So we talked about the what is process mining? Why is it important? Going now a bit to the, but how then? How can we do process mining? Well, obviously, if you have a process, you need to understand then, okay, if you want to start mining this process, we need to understand which systems are supporting these processes, right? Which systems are supporting these activities that happen within the process, and are these systems recording the data that we need? And again, we like to talk in the process mining world about events. Now, in general, what you will find is that certain steps and certain systems maintain these very neat, very structured event logs. Typically, you can find these in systems that have a kind of a workflow. You might think systems like, I know, ServiceNow or Salesforce, where you might find these ideal data sets that can be used for process mining, where you have a nice, identifiers, timestamps, descriptions of what is happening. So that is really the ideal world. In a lot of cases, though, you will find that the data that you need is stored in a kind of a distributed nature in databases, where you need to consider many tables that contain the information you need for process mining. But regardless, wherever it's stored, you need to find out where is this data stored, and then of course, how do we get access to that data? And that brings me then to the final slide before we jump into the demo. Obviously, getting access to the data is also very core capability of process mining, and that is something that we also very much support with the ARIS platform, and we offer various ways to get access to your data. Now, the traditional file upload is of course is always there. Hey, you can export data out of your system yourself and upload that into the process mining platform. But there is also ways that we can directly connect into the systems that are there. This could be on-premise applications, and there, for example, we might be looking at in a way to utilize a local extractor that we install that then connects to your databases, and the extractor then pushes the data into the SaaS solution, which is process mining. But alternatively, we can also connect into any kind of SaaS application that typically provides some kind of HTTPS endpoint so that you can connect to it through an API interface. Or we even offer our own API, which maybe some of your existing integration or middleware solutions can use to actually push the data into our solution. So we offer various ways to also help you get access to the data you need for process mining. So, very brief introduction on what it is, why it is important and why it can be helpful, and very brief on how it works. Of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the Q&A. But now I would like to jump over to the actual demonstration. Here we are. So welcome to to the process mining module within ARIS, and I think that is important to emphasize that this is not an isolated solution. It's very much a component within the ARIS platform, specifically the SaaS version of ARIS. I think that's important to mention. And what we're looking here now is your typical procurement process. Just a brief explainer what you're looking at. We're now looking at a discovered process, so not one that was designed, but based on data, this was the process that was discovered. And the way that is now visualized is that we have a starting point here in green, and on the end we have an endpoint, and of course in between we have steps and we have connections, and on top of these steps and connections, numbers are projected. Now in this instance we're looking at the number of cases that follow a certain route and where a certain activity occurs in, but you can also quickly switch between those templates. You could also take more from a time perspective, as I've done now. Now we're looking at throughput time, and we can see now durations between steps and on steps. But you could basically use any kind of metric that you would have available. Now, maybe jumping back to the cases, this looks to be a very mean and lean process, right? So very straightforward. Now I can guarantee you when you start with process mining, this is not what you will end up with. Because when you start twiddling a little bit with some of these sliders, you can see it on the right side. One is representing the number of activities or the percentage of activities being shown, and the other one is showing the percentage of connections being shown. When you start adding some more of the complexity to it, you will start noticing this lean and mean process getting a bit more complex. We're getting now additional activities, and again, they're getting more exceptional when we go to the right. And the same is true for connections. Adding more connections, more connections, more connections. And then what you typically end up with when you go to the full 100% is this spaghetti view, as we typically also call this. Now, this is a demo data set. Believe me when I say, if you would apply process mining on your processes, on your data, where you might be looking at 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million cases of a given process, this spaghetti view would be far, far more complex. And that really gives you an insight in all the different ways your process is being executed. So this is nice, right? The spaghetti view. So what are some of the options then to start making sense of that? So one way to make sense of this is through the lens of variance. So that is another aspect that process mining discovers. It's not only the cases, so the singular executions of the process. It will also give you insights in all the unique ways the process has been executed. And that's what we call a variant, so a unique process pattern. Now, based on what we see here, just going to highlight two numbers. We have discovered 10,000 cases, so 10,000 ways, so 10,000 times this process was executed. But those 10,000 cases were executed in 86 different ways. And that is what the variants are. And out of the box, again, we're showing you all the different variants that were discovered, and you can sort them in all kind of different ways. What were the most common variants? What were the least common variants? What took the longest, or what were the quickest? And if you select the different variants, it will start showing you the different patterns that were found. And with each pattern, you can also exactly see how many times this pattern was done and what the coverage is in terms of total case amount. Of course, you can select them individually, or you can start selecting them multiple ones at the same time. So the lens of variance is one way you can slowly start making sense of that. Another way that can really help you start analyzing some of this complexity is through some of the GenAI capabilities that we have introduced in recent years. And I'm going to show you at various stages where those might come in. And the first one I want to highlight here Now I've selected a set of variants here, and now I can look at my companion, as we call it, and ask some questions. So I can ask it to describe maybe the process. I can ask it to give a description of the most frequent connections or the frequent steps, the most frequent variants. I can ask it to identify anomalies in the process, or I can ask it to maybe look at some of the performance issues in the process. And that's the one I want to select now. And this is really done in an ad hoc manner. So also very much depending on the selection that you have made. And then it start finding some of its, mentioning some of its findings. So here, for example, it mentions high case duration with certain variants. It mentions change steps, rejections, and at the end it just summarizes them as well. So again, so it mentions some of the root causes that driving long durations, for example, is around the inclusion of changes in the process. It detected some issues around invoicing. The rejection scenario is causing some issues, and there's some variants that it deems unusual. And again, this is just a tool to help accelerate some of the analysis that you are doing. Another way that might help you to make sense of some of this complexity is through what we call the event log. Now, the event log allows you to create a view on a process similar to, maybe some of you are familiar with the database world and tables, right? Where you can also create views on tables that offer maybe a simplified view. It can offer a kind of an alternative view on a table where you might have done some transformations on it or aggregated certain things. Now, this is more or less the same, but then on the perspective of process. So for example, I could create a view where I filtered out all the changes. So saying for this particular business question I'm looking at, maybe all of these individual changes are not really relevant to consider. Having selected this view, what is interesting now that my number of variants that started off with 86 has now gone back to 24, which indicates to me that a lot of the variance is being driven by the changes that are occurring in the process. Alternatively, I could also maybe have a view where I look at the process, and then I just need to refresh, that say, well, I may be only interested in the first part of the process, the procurement side of things. The invoicing is maybe a separate analysis, but I want to focus on the first part of the process. So now I've basically filtered out everything that happens after the receipt of a service or a good. You could even take some more stranger perspectives and say, well, for a particular analysis, I'm just going to flip it all around, and I'm not going to look at the process perspective, but now I'm going to take the user perspective, and I want to see how users or teams are interacting with each other. So this is some of the capabilities that you can make, can apply to start making sense of some of this complexity. Now, above and beyond some of the more traditional things that you can do, obviously, like maybe selecting certain data filters, like, okay, but how does it look for country A, or how does it look for country B, or product A or product B? Like I said at the beginning, this is ARIS process mining, and this is and again, from our perspective, it's very much a capability that is tightly integrated and really part of the wider ARIS platform. And one of these use cases, as you can imagine, is also about, discovering the processes, discovering maybe some of these local variants that you have at certain countries, certain sites, and then moving these discovered variants back into the design repository. So I'm just going to show you how that works now as well. So I've selected such a local or special variant. In this case, I've selected the top 2 variants. And now I can seamlessly move that into the design repository. It's a simple wizard. Transfer, store model. this now brings me to the design repository of ARIS that I think a lot of you are familiar with. My first model, ABC, because I think I've done this a few times. I can then decide where exactly in which database and where in which folder I'm going to store this model. I can select 2 different model types here in this case. Save. Now it's transferring the model. And then I could immediately go and edit that model if I wanted to. Now all of these objects are then being created as definition copies in the ARIS, in your ARIS database. And again, obviously from a design perspective, now what you would like to do is, start maybe adding some of those manual activities that are there. Obviously starting adding some of the lanes that are there. And then of course you can create a proper reference model for that. But again, this is just one of the interaction points where we have between, say, mining and the designing capabilities. Jumping back to process mining, going back to making sense of some of this complexity, another way that I think is really helpful is through something we call the model overlay. And again, this is one of those points where we really bring those worlds of a more static design model together with the dynamics and the visualizations of a mined a process. And what you can see in this overlay in the gray is a properly designed model of this procure-to-pay process. You can see the lanes a little bit in the gray. You can see the steps, the operators there. And then on top of that, those discovered variants are projected. I can select a variant, and then that particular variant is projected on top of that reference model. Select another one, and the same is happening. Now, in the case certain activities that were discovered that were not part of the reference model, this is then also highlighted in red. And finally, what you can also do, you can see some of these numbers. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see some of these numbers here. You can also add some additional numbers depending on the metrics that you have available. So for example, I could also add the activity duration to it. Now, all of this is within on the, let's call it the process mining side of the ARIS platform. What I think is the real power of this is when you bring this kind of capability inside the traditional ARIS portal, where people currently are, I think in a lot of your organizations, are consuming the process models that you have designed. And again, here we now are in the ARIS portal. It's the same reference model you saw before. But what I can do now, also here, is activate this overlay here as well. And again, you can see the same projection of those discovered processes on top of the overlay. And I can also add again the same metrics I prepared. And the reason why I say I think this is very powerful, because this really helps, let's call it the 2 traditional stakeholder groups, right? Let's call it stakeholder group A, the traditional process mining stakeholder group, and let's call it stakeholder group B, the traditional ARIS consumers, the consumers of process content through the ARIS portal. For the traditional process mining stakeholder group, I think this is an excellent way to expose the work and the insights to a far wider audience than I think traditionally happens. If you look at traditional process mining dashboards or views, you can see that large complexity of the spaghetti model, the dashboards containing all kind of charts and distributions. So there's a lot of interpretation that needs to happen here. So through this overlay, which I think provides a way to expose process mining results in a kind of a, I won't want to say simplified view, but maybe that is the right word, right? In a kind of simplified view, some of these insights that I think is far more easily be able to consume this type of content for a far wider audience, for a far wider process community. So I think this is a real boon for your, let's call it traditional process mining audience, to expose some of their insight to a far bigger audience. And on the other stakeholder group, the ARIS stakeholder group, the consumers of some of this process content through the ARIS portal, I mean, look at it, right? I mean, this really brings some of the processes that you spend a lot of time and effort modeling and putting into ARIS, can really bring them alive, right? I think, and really give I think a very interesting reason for also for your own large stakeholder group to come back into ARIS, look at some of these process models that you created, and really bring those alive with some of the insights, some of the variants, some of the numbers coming out of the process mining system. So I think this is a real powerful capability to expose process mining to a very large audience without being suddenly too complex while looking at a big spaghetti or complex charts and analysis. But if you want to, you can still, of course, do that as well. So you can still also add some of these process mining dashboards that you have created also here directly in the ARIS portal. So you can now look at a simplified dashboard, or you could just also add directly this process explorer view that we saw before as well with the complexities. So that is also still a choice available to you. You can also assign the full process mining dashboards here as well. So these are all options available that you could decide to do as well. Now, jumping back to our process mining system a little bit. In the introduction, we also talked about conformancy, so the operational compliance aspect. So the comparison between what you have modeled, which should reflect how a process should be executed, and then the discovered reality that comes through process mining. Now, within process mining, obviously, you can load some of these reference models directly for ARIS, from the ARIS repository. You can map those to the discovered process, and making sure that you might have modeled a step called ABC, but when you mine that process, that step might not be exactly called ABC, but ABC 1, 2, 3. So you can make that little bit of a mapping to make sure that the system understands, okay, this step in the reference model means this step in the discovered model. So you can do that mapping, and when you've done that, you can really start addressing this topic of conformancy. Are we following the process? And here we offer a couple of insights, a couple of figures, a couple of numbers. And I want to first focus on the conformancy aspect of it. Now, conformancy, or the conformance rate, this is something that comes out of the box when you have loaded at least one reference model, is the absolute comparison between a case, a discovered case, and the reference model. So the number of mistakes is not relevant. If one mistake happens, 0% conformancy for a singular case. If two mistakes happens, 0% conformance rate for a single case. If no mistakes happen, now then the case is fully conformant. And then, of course, if you look at overall the number of cases that were discovered, right, the 10,000 cases, if you remember, we now have in this particular demo, we have a conformance rate of 37%. So it's a very strict measure. It doesn't take into account the number of mistakes that can happen. So in addition to that, we also offer what we call the fitness value. And that is something that does take into account the number of mistakes that can happen. So you could have a singular case that has a conformancy rate of 0%, but a fitness value of 82 or 67 or 95, depending on the number of mistakes that can happen. So it gives you a more nuanced picture on the question, are we following the process? Now, numbers is always interesting, right? How are we doing? But just as important, if not more important, of course, is to understand what is going wrong. And obviously that's also coming out of the box. So you can directly see all the reasons for non-conformancy. And here we detect 4 potential issue types, as we call them. So one of them is you started the process incorrectly. Obviously, then another one is you ended the process incorrectly. So the process was ended with an activity that should not be the end activity. Another thing that is being looked for is the sequence. So according to the reference model, we expect a sequence of A, B, C, but through the discovery of the process, to the discovery of the variance, we find a large amount of cases where the sequence goes A, C, B. So that's another aspect that is discovered. And the final aspect is something we call unwanted activity. Now, I'm not entirely happy that we call it like that, but what it reflects is simply that we have found activities, process steps in the discovered processes through process mining that are not part of the reference model. Now, that can indicate 2 things, obviously. One, it can indicate indeed we are executing certain activities that we should not execute. So that is a real problem on the execution side of the process. On the other hand, it can also mean that the reference model that we are using, that we are putting in our ARIS repository, that we communicate to the wide process community, is also not up to date or not complete. So that's why I think this conformity aspect is not only a quality check on the execution side of things, are we following the process, but it's also a quality check the other way around, right? Are our models, are our reference content that we put in ARIS, is that also complete, or is it still up to date? Does it reflect really all the unique variants that is accepted and that should be done, maybe by local regulations? Did we account for that in our reference model? So it's a quality check that goes both ways. Now, this very much focuses around, I call it typically structural conformancy. So does the structure of the model look like? But there are also aspects to the question, are we following the process, that does not necessarily have anything to do with the structure of the process. And that's why you also have these rule checks available in the context of this conformity topic. Because you can imagine that you have a process where you request something and that request gets approved. Now, from a conformity perspective, request approve, perfect, excellent, right? No problem with that. But if the requester, Roland, is also the same person that is approving that request, Roland, is that correct? Are we then following the process as intended? I think the answer to that is no, right? So we also allow you to build these additional rules that check additional aspects on how the process is executed. For example, like segregation of duties. And this then also gives you a number, a rule compliancy number. So then I'm now jumping back. So 1, we give you a conformance rate, checking the structural adherence to your reference. We allow you to create rules that then allow you to measure the rule compliancy of the process. And then we even give you a third number that looks at both of these. So that's then the overall compliancy rate of the process. So I think, again, this is one of those core use cases of process mining. And while we are here, I also want to highlight another capability that exists in the ARIS platform, is something we call the root cause miner. Because this conformance overview does give you the the reasons for non-conformancy. But of course, what follows then? Okay, but why is this happening then? Or in what kind of context is this problem occurring? And therefore, we also have something called the root cause miner, and it allows you to first select any kind of symptom. So in this particular case, I will be selecting a conformance issue, but you could also be selecting a step in the process, a connection between steps. It could be a range in a chart. It can be anything that you can select. You can introduce as a symptom. So I'm now selecting the symptom change purchase order is an unwanted activity. And what I'm now going to ask the system to do is, dear process mining system, dear ARIS process mining, can you go through all the data attributes that I have available in my data model and all the values within those data attributes, and give me the biggest correlations to the problem I have selected. Perform analysis. And like I said, it goes through all data attributes that exist in my data model. And then it starts looking at all the individual values and starts scoring them according to the symptom rate and the relevancy of it. That it produces a score, and then I get a list of values that exist in my data model where the system is saying, look, Mr. Analyst, if you want to start your analysis, this might be an interesting starting point. And of course, you can tweak that list. So I could, for example, remove some unnecessary attributes that I think, well, maybe that is not really relevant, that I want to remove from the check I am doing. I'm just clicking now, removing some of those. And then I can ask the system again. And then again, it scores all the individual values and highlights, well, for this problem that you selected, you might want to start with, I don't know, purchase organization and MEA, because relatively speaking, this problem occurs a lot there. Or you might want to look at a certain PR reviewer, or maybe a certain vendor that you want to investigate. Again, but the idea being is that the analyst doesn't start from scratch and needs to slice and dice through all the potential thousands of attributes that exist in your data model, but really to help jumpstart that analysis by, hey, according to correlation rules, you might want to start here. So I think this is also quite a powerful ability that's available to accelerate some of these analyses. Now, we've talked about discovery, right? Discovery of the process, discovery of the variance, bringing that into ARIS. We've talked about the overlay, presenting some of these results in a simple manner. We now looked at conformancy, but as in the beginning, I also explained, process analytics. So looking at metrics, looking at lead times, looking at analyzing those. That's also very much, of course, a part of process mining. And I just want to show you an example like here. So this is a dashboard that's built around the processing time. And then we support all kind of ways to visualize and analyze that. Those metrics that you are creating. So that's another point I think it's good to mention, is that out of the box, certain standard metrics come with any kind of project you're doing in process mining around lead times, duration, wait times. But of course, you can also add and create your own metrics as well. Here we have an example of a dashboard that looks at processing time. You can select things, you can play around with, you can select ranges. These are then transferred as filters on the top. You can also introduce interactive components to it, like this. And what you can also do, and then I'm coming back to our companion. Is already something what I've done before, but you can also ask the companion to answer some simple questions around the performance. And the great thing about that is that these wouldn't need to be pre-prepared like a dashboard typically is. A dashboard is typically that something like an analyst builds, and then a viewer or a consumer can look at that dashboard and interact with that. But through the companion, you can also ask your own questions, such as, what are the top 10 activities that take the longest? And then this question is, and the result of that question is generated in an ad hoc manner. So this is using a standard question, but I could also ask it directly, what is the case duration of per purchase organization? Question mark. And then, then I get a feedback request. So let me just quickly, what is the case duration of the purchase organizations? I think it's smart enough to allow for typos. Luckily, because otherwise I have a big problem. And then it gives you, depending on the question, an outcome. So again, this is again some of these examples of where we are introducing some of these Gen AI capabilities. And finally, I just want to show you some other flavors how these dashboards can look like. Again, this is now a little view created around automation. Just to give you a bit of a flavor of some of the visualization options. Similarly, you could also have a view like around analyzing some of the organizational components here. Again, different views, different components. I mean, there are a lot of visualization options, so you can really create your own dashboards in whatever manner that you see fit and really answers the business question that you're asking. Now, also considering the time a little bit, I want to leave the demo here. It was very much focused on the front end of the solution. Obviously, there's also an entire back end to it. But I guess these can be addressed in more one-to-one sessions where you can really go into the nitty-gritty details of it. For now, I just want to quickly jump back to the slide deck and look at some of the final slides here before I hand over back to Marleen to answer some of the questions you might have. These are some of the capabilities that were also highlighted in the demonstration. Some of them are not, but you will probably be getting these slides as well. So we talked about discovery and variant analysis, compliance checking. The other two is more on the back end side of things, like data source connectors we have available, data transformation, obviously something we support. Process enhancement here, we talk about the overlay. Again, I think a very powerful ability. One thing that we didn't address, but is also supported by the solution, is what we call insight to actions, meaning that you can actually have the process mining system trigger outside automation flows that you might have. And so, for example, you could have a bot, an RPA bot sitting somewhere, and process mining could trigger that based on a rule violation, a bot that does something, or it could also be like an automation flow that you have in your automation platform. So that then it really brings process mining in a more proactive state as well. But again, you will get some of these slides after the fact that you really can look at some of these capabilities. I just want to finalize things on the roadmap that we have. So process mining is a very important capability within the ARIS platform. So you will see a lot of developments that are coming. Some of the big ones that are coming in the future, I think I just want to highlight is process simulation. So you probably already know that ARIS supports simulation. At the moment, it exists in the rich client that we have. What is coming early next year or H1 next year is where we make simulation. We're completely going to redo it and make it available in the web. And more importantly, we will also have it tightly integrated with process mining so that you can also, for example, use some of the process mining metrics in terms of frequency, in probabilities, also directly for your simulation cases. So I think that is makes things very interesting. Additionally, what's coming up is EPC support for conformancy as well. You saw I was using BPMN, but in the future, we will also be supporting EPC support because still a large amount of our customers are using EPC, which is great. So we're going to support that. Obviously, some platform enhancements in terms of making your life more easier or supporting more capabilities in terms of data transformation or visualization of things. Another big thing that we are introducing next year is this term of this capability we call object centricity. That's another thing that's fairly new in the world of process mining. I will not go into details now, but that is a capability that we'll be supporting in the future. And of course, we will continually support enhancements on AI, both Gen AI and traditional AI using trained models as well.